people trickling in. Oh, I love the Zoom voice. That's my favorite. But you know, if folks show up within the next couple of minutes, that's totally fine. But good afternoon / evening / night, whatever time of day it is, wherever you are, to all of you. I'm really excited to be here. I first want to thank the organizers of this conference, the Youth Language Conference, for the work that they've done. This is the exact kind of event that I wish had been around when, you know, I was in high school and when I was much younger, to kind of connect with other folks who had, you know, the same kind of hobbyist interest in languages, but didn't really know what to do with them, and, you know, and to, you know, really network and connect with those folks. So this is an amazing opportunity. Really kudos to you guys for developing this, and inshallah, as we say in Arabic, God willing, it will continue for many years to come, and continue to grow. But my name is Dana Slayton. I'm currently a senior at Cornell University. I'll be graduating in like 2 months, which is a little scary to think about, but that's where I'm at. I study Arabic linguistics and Middle Eastern studies in an independent research program. My research actually focuses on Coptic language revitalization movements in Egypt using Arabic sources. So I use Arabic pretty much every day in my research work, in my schoolwork, and in my job, as I'll talk about in a little bit. But my whole kind of idea for this presentation was I wanted to, you know, give you guys kind of a bit of the kind of my story with language learning, because I know that was something that a lot of, you know, the directors and participants mentioned being interesting. So kind of how I got into it, how I found my way to Arabic specifically. And then really what I want to do is kind of illustrate some perspectives or I guess some approaches you can take to your eventual, you know, job search or academic development, or kind of wherever you go in the future, to make sure that language learning doesn't just stay a hobby that you use in your private life and become something that you can actually apply in your day-to-day. Because as I'm sure most of you know, when you're learning a new language, it's not enough to just read in it or to just write in it or to kind of give yourself your 10 minutes a day. You really have to give the language a place to live in your life. And so this presentation is really about how to make that place kind of your professional life, your job. Obviously, I'm still a student, so my work now is part-time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But the kind of tactics and techniques that I'll talk about towards the end of the presentation are really applicable and have been key to my actual, you know, my search for full-time work, post-graduation, and all of that. And then at the end, I'll have, you know, lots of time for you guys to ask questions or chat, or, you know, if you want to, you know, talk about your favorite Arabic words, whatever it is, just let me know. So I have, plenty of time for that. And, you know, really just want to hang out with you guys and kind of hear about your perspectives. But I guess a little bit of background about me. The way that I talk about my journey with language learning, and kind of the way that I came to linguistics is kind of as a love story, because in a lot of ways, I think Arabic, the Arabic language specifically, was really my first real love. Obviously, that's not a person in a relationship, but it shares a lot of characteristics in the sense that it was my dopamine hit for a very, very long time. I started learning Arabic when I was 13, my freshman year of high school. And prior to starting with Arabic, I had kind of this weird language learning hobby for years upon years. Since I was really little, I would go on Google Translate. This is like Gen 1 Google Translate, right? You know, really early on when the app was, you know, just being born. And I would pick a random language and I would just start typing sentences in, English sentences, and then trying to use what I typed in the English sentence to parse the sentences in the language that Google Translate was returning. So I would, you know, go through it. I would type, I want a tomato, and I would try and figure out which word meant I, which word meant want, which word meant tomato, those sorts of things in Google Translate as like a puzzle, for years when I was a kid. And it was, you know, it was something where, you know, my parents and my friends were like, you know, this is something that you're good at, but what are you going to do with this? Particularly because in the US, I think that, particularly at lower grade levels in, like, you know, middle school, we don't have a super strong and supportive infrastructure in our public education system for language learners, right? So you end up with a lot of, I think that's again why I think this conference is so great, but you end up with a lot of people floating around that kind of have this weird, you know, hobby that are into the whole Google Translate thing, or they're trying to teach themselves French or Spanish or Italian or whatever it is, but don't necessarily have an outlet for it. So that was me for a really long time, really pretty much until I started high school, like I said, when I was 13. I took German in middle school. I'm actually half German on my mom's side, so that helped. But my first real experience and foray into serious dedicated language learning was with Arabic. And I say it was my first love because it was kind of serendipitous. I mean, I basically, after 2 days of class, high school Arabic class, I came home and I told my parents, I was like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And obviously they were like, okay, that's cute. But, following that, I stuck with it. And I, managed to kind of make it this constant centerpiece in everything that I've really done since. So it kind of colored my whole life experience, starting from when I was 13, all the way up until the present. And I think that a lot of that power that language learning has, that Arabic had for me, that, I'm sure many of your target languages have for you, is that the magic of doing it, the magic of kind of reinventing yourself in this other language and of learning to express yourself and come into your own in this foreign tongue that feels so different to you, is that it's empowering. You realize in the process, or at least for me, it was how I learned about myself through, the tumult of adolescence, so to speak, was through learning Arabic, was through speaking Arabic. It was through the connections that I made via this language, because it forced me out of my comfort zone all the time. But at the same time, I was always doing something that I loved. So it was this intersection of, this place of comfort, and this place of, joy, because Arabic brought me so much joy, continues to bring me joy. But at the same time, I was always stretched and I was always learning. And I think that experience, when you can kind of live in that space, which language learning is so good at doing for you, when you can live in that space, that's where, the magic really happens. And that was incredibly empowering for me. So when I was in high school, I actually got the chance to study abroad twice on a couple of scholarships. So I studied in Morocco for a summer in 2015. And then again for an academic year, so as a gap year between high school and college in 2017 and 2018. And those experiences were also, that was the first opportunity I had to speak Arabic to people that weren't my classmates. It was like, really a whole new world type experience where I finally had the chance to go out and to live the language really every day. And I think that my desire to really integrate Arabic into my work and into my professional life in any way I possibly could came from living overseas, because I realized that I kind of came to realize what I was talking about earlier, right? Which is this concept that unless your language has a place to live in your life, it's going to atrophy. It's going to be much harder to maintain it if you don't give it a home. And when I was in Morocco, it had a home because everyone around me was speaking it. Right. But when I came back to the US for the first, I would say 6 months to a year that I was back, I really felt unmoored. I really felt like I was floundering because I felt like this language didn't have a place to live. I had classes that I took, but they were by and large too easy in college. And it wasn't the same as, leaving class and, going out and every sign is in Arabic and every menu is in Arabic and everyone around you, all of the ambient noise is Arabic. So it was kind of for ages, I guess, when I got back to the US, I was struggling to figure out how I was gonna give this language a place to live for me, because that was important, and because I was kind of addicted at that point to the high that you get from speaking a language that you've come to love, right? And in searching for, I don't know if you guys can see this picture, so I'm going to move myself over there. Not entirely sure, but in my kind of search for a home for my target language for Arabic, that was how I started looking for jobs. So I was really fresh out of high school. I hadn't even had a year of college under my belt when I came back to the States, and I was kind of like, okay, I need to make some money. I got to work. What am I going to do? And I knew at that point that I wanted to use Arabic, and I was, searching for a home for it, and I was searching for a way to use it. And thankfully, I actually came upon a summer camp counselor position that was at an immersion camp for Arabic, right? This is completely by chance. It was via me Googling. And it was really kind of the only job that I could find at that time that wouldn't, require me to have a degree or, years of experience, but that would still let me use the language, right? And I had, very limited experience with teaching at that point, but I knew that it was something that I was interested in. So I applied, had my interviews and everything, talked to folks at the camp, and I ended up getting the job. And that was my first experience with living Arabic in the United States. So it was an immersion camp, right? So in a sense, it's pretty easy to live the language in an immersion camp. Everyone around me was speaking it. All my coworkers were Arabs. My boss was an Arabic speaker. So kind of, it was like, we had no choice. But at the same time, it made me realize that the kind of I'd fallen in love with Arabic a long time ago, but that kind of love that you feel for that language demands to be shared. And that's the other thing that I think should motivate you all when you are, considering where you're going to go down the line in the future, where you want to work. You should think about it in terms of love. Think about it in terms of a love story, and think about it in terms of when you have this feeling and this passion for a language. Eventually it gets so big that you have to share it with other people. And the way you do that is through your work, is through giving your language a place to live. It's through, all of these kinds of different opportunities that you can have no matter where you are in the world, to use it as a force for connecting with people. So the way that I see it and the way that I think about integrating language in your profession, whether it's, finance or medicine or teaching or, nonprofit, it's about giving back. It's about kind of giving back to others what language learning gave to you. And that was really how I felt when I started teaching. I continued teaching at that camp for 2 years. I did some virtual Arabic teaching, and I loved, working in education and in those kinds of spaces. Started doing research on pedagogy pre-COVID. Obviously, COVID changed things. Wasn't able to, continue in classroom research. But I think the key to remember is that, when you're looking for jobs, when you're looking for, professional opportunities, your question should be, right? Obviously, you're going to have your parameters and you're going to have your, your wants and your needs. But in terms of language, it should be, how is this going to give me a chance to share the love? How is this going to give me a chance to myself feel the joy that I feel when I speak and learn a new language, but also to help others? How am I going to make that contagious? And that's why I think that, education was such a kind of a calling for me and such a perfect fit. But it's not the only way to do that. You can do that in, finance. You can do that in banking. You can do that in almost any field. I think there's, a perfect example is when I got to college, when I moved to Ithaca, my first job was at a Starbucks. Like, I was literally just a barista at a Starbucks, and I needed to, make some money. And this was after my summer camp gig, right? Obviously, there was nothing in that job description that would require that I speak Arabic, right? But several of our regulars that would visit us at this Starbucks worked at a pizzeria across the street that was run by, as it so happened, a Moroccan man. And a lot of his workers were also Arabic speakers. So I found a way every day, every shift that I went into, Ahmed was his name. When Ahmed would come in and order his coffee, he would do it in Arabic and I would respond in Arabic, and we kind of knew each other. And through that relationship, we had other folks from the pizzeria that would come in, other Arabic speakers, right? So I found a way to give the language a home in my job, even when my job was completely unrelated to Arabic, as like it wasn't a linguistics position. I wasn't translating anything, but I was still using it as this means to connect, and I was still using it as a way to give back in the community, right? And I think that's really key, is that it doesn't have to be a checkbox on your resume. It can be something as simple as, oh, I hear a French speaker coming into the coffee shop I work in. Oh, that's cool. Let me see if they want to speak to me in French. Stuff like that is really what I'm talking about when I started talking about this integrative approach to career development, right? In languages. And I think that, so I guess moving from kind of my story and my background, that's really kind of my history. Currently, I'm actually preparing for a full-time position in nonprofit now, where I'm going to be, it's an Egyptian nonprofit organization, and I'm going to be basically using Arabic every day. It's a communications job. So found a way to integrate that, found a way to, do other kind of education, teaching type work in college. But I think the crux of what I really want to talk about with you guys, and what I want you guys to think about, is how you can do this for yourselves. Even if you're 13 now and you're like, I don't really care about working, I'm not trying to tell you to go out and apply for every single internship, or start worrying about this, or start crafting your application years in advance. I know that's something that a lot of people, particularly people who love languages and who are really, really dedicated to learning them, tend to do. They tend to think this is something, it's like this long process, and it's, I developed my resume for years, and I, put, hours upon hours upon hours of work into this. And to some extent, that's helpful, and you need to, get on the grind and do the work to build your language skills and to build your resume. But it really, you should never be doing anything just for the purpose of boosting your resume, just for the purpose of making yourself look better, right? You should be doing it for the purpose of, like I said, sharing that love that language gives you. And that's where this kind of integrative approach to career development comes from for me. And I call it this because I don't think, I don't want to address you guys and just give you a list of language related careers. because you can find that yourselves on Google. And being language learners, you guys know the types of careers that people who, speak another language fluently can do and can use their language in. But what I really want to talk about is how you can make language learning a priority and a part of your professional life in any field, regardless. And I kind of just split it up into these, 3 tactics or these 3 ideas. And they are completely generalizable and they apply across the board, right? So the first is what I call this both and approach. I've had a lot of calls with people, with former coworkers or peers or former students who reach out to me and they basically say, listen, I really want to be a doctor, or I really want to get my MBA, or I want to start a business, but I don't want to give up on Arabic. And I feel like I have to choose because I feel like I can't, get what I need to get done for med school and also be learning Arabic at the same time. It's too hard to balance. So I've had a lot of these conversations before. And I think the key is to not look at language learning it is as an either or proposition, right? I think a lot of times we tend to think, I need to dedicate either all of my time to becoming fluent in XYZ language or all of my time to, organic chemistry so I can get a medical degree, or economics so I can work in finance, or whatever that other field may be. The thing is, language learning does not have to be your entire career for it to be a key part and a cornerstone of your career. You can have the both and. It doesn't have to be the either or. And something that's really key to making that happen is knowing how to market your language skills. You can Google this. It's all free information out there, but there is almost no situation in which knowing a second language will be detrimental to a job application, or in which a recruiter or whoever is looking at your, job or internship application will not care. It only can help you because it doesn't just show you, I have these skills and I can, talk to Arabic speakers. That's not the only thing that language learning is about. It shows that you have dedication and drive to a difficult task, and you have seen it through to a degree of success, right? Because I think that's what language learning is in a way. It's like project management, right? You have a goal, you have an end goal, and you have to put in concrete steps and work to achieve that. It's a stepwise process. It shows dedication. So even if you only speak, an intermediate level of, 3 languages, the fact that you've achieved that shows that you've had to put in, hundreds of hours in most cases of instruction or of self-study, of practice, of homework in order to do that. That is never going to reflect poorly on you. And at the same time, so you should always think about that when you're thinking about, what classes do I want to take? Or, what am I going to do with, with this Arabic thing on my resume? Do I even include this in the future? Even if you're not looking to go into the language industry or into language services, you can still absolutely use your language skills, and you should include them always and market them, right? So the second thing is networking. And I actually hate this word because I think it's a buzzword in a lot of cases, and people don't really know what they're talking about when they say networking. When I say networking, I'm not talking about going to specific events and happy hours and, all that jazz. I think particularly in the COVID and post-COVID era, we've seen that, the type of, happy hour, going to dedicated networking spaces to talk to other professionals, it is kind of, changing that model. It's moving out of style a little bit. And I think that's a good thing, because I think that for a lot of us, it can be really intimidating to picture networking as like going to a dinner or going to a happy hour or going to, this event at this bar or whatever it may be, particularly if you're introverted. I'm a very introverted person. I'm very type A. It's very nerve-wracking for me to go and like stand in a room and, you have to like mingle and talk to new people like that. So when I say networking, I want to be clear that I don't mean that alone. If that is your jam and your speed, go ahead. But if it's not, this is not, what I'm talking about is not, go to every happy hour. What I'm talking about is more, make sure that the other people that are learning the languages that you're learning. And it doesn't mean you have to know every person, but you should know some. You should focus on building a community of learners, specifically, not just native speakers, because it's critically important to build community with native speakers and to, forge those relationships and make them stronger. But for your professional purposes, when you're, on the job hunt, particularly if you're doing it domestically or in whatever country it is you're living in, you want to know other learners, because other learners who are, then go on and, apply for jobs or apply for internships or whatever it is, they're going to have connections in, various different industries they'll be able to put in a good word for you, and they'll be able to kind of coach you based on their experiences on how to, craft your story in a way that's attractive and compelling to people in different industries. So the key is that informal communication, that networking with other learners. And I say informal communication, right? Because I'm trying to move away from this idea of networking as all happy hours. I mean, it can be as simple as, if you go on a language study abroad program, join the alumni Facebook group right after. Or if you're learning English or Spanish or another language that has a lot of Facebook groups that are created around it, where it's like English Conversation Partners group, or I know that there are several in the DC area that are like DC language meetups or whatever. These types of groups are key, and they are networking tools, right? So these are not, specifically professional networking. They're just, in general, making friends or, reconnecting with other alumni. They don't have to have specifically professional purposes to be really important for your professional life. Like, I have had multiple jobs that I would not have gotten if not for knowing somebody, if not for, knowing a friend who had worked for this company like 2 years ago, or a friend who had done a language program with this company, a year ago. Those sorts of connections, they're informal, but they're incredibly important. So don't intimidate yourself by being like, oh, I need to be networking with professionals and whenever I'm in high school. No, that's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about just be sure that you know other learners, and be sure that you have, established enough of a rapport with some of them to reach out, because that becomes really key later on down the line. And the third thing that I want to talk about is building proficiency. I think a lot of people there are some people that take a Renaissance man, jack of all trades, collect them all approach to language learning. And there's absolutely value to that, and to knowing, a little bit of a lot of languages. And there are some people that dive really, really far headfirst into one. I kind of oscillated between both. When I started high school, I took like 4 languages at once. And then I always say that Arabic kind of ate the rest of them over time. So I eventually kind of decided to specialize in Arabic, but before that I was doing the jack of all trades thing. What I would recommend is that if you're looking to use your language skills in a professional context, this is not to say you should give up on every other language that you're learning, but you should find one of your languages that you're studying, if you're studying multiple, or just the one that you are studying, and you should really focus on developing your proficiency as much as you can in that one language, because there are several languages, particularly less commonly taught ones, like Arabic or Chinese or Russian, where having a beginner level proficiency is becoming increasingly common, right? A lot of people are, getting, limited exposure to Chinese, limited exposure to Arabic, limited exposure to these, these kinds of big ticket, languages. But it's a pyramid, and there's a lot of attrition. So what I'm saying is that don't give up if it gets hard. Keep studying until you can get to, a high intermediate or an advanced proficiency in the language. That will really set you apart. There are going to be a lot of people, particularly in the language industry, in the education industry, that are applying for jobs with these kinds of critical language skills. But what can set you apart from people with the exact same, language toolbox as you are 2 things. One, it's your passion for the language, right? Like I told you, remember, the love is key. And your passion will show through in any interview or cover letter that you write if you try, and if you keep that kind of at the forefront of your brain. So that's one thing. And the other thing is your proficiency. If you're an advanced speaker of your language, if you go beyond just the hello, how are you, and the basics, if you can talk about, different topics, if you can talk about specific things that are relevant to your profession in the language, and you can prove that, that's key. And that's really going to set you apart from a lot of people, because a lot of people come at this with, they're kind of generalists, and they come with, oh, I don't know what I'm going to, learn, whatever, this, that, and the other thing. And they maybe, have a little bit of proficiency in several languages. But if you want to really stick out, my best advice is that, really work on building high level proficiency in at least one. And I know that that's way easier said than done. And obviously, if it's not possible for you in terms of timing, like that's fine, but it will definitely set you apart. So and I don't mean let all of your other languages fall by the wayside by any stretch of the imagination, but I am saying that it's hard to make realistic goals. Don't say you're going to become an advanced speaker of Russian, Portuguese, Italian, German, Spanish, French, Arabic all at once. Look at your portfolio of languages that you study, and think. And say, which of these is the one I like the most? You could say, which of these is the easiest? Which of these is the hardest? I don't know what your logic is. And it depends on you, really. It completely depends on you. but pick one, focus on it, really build your proficiency in that, be the best you can be, non-native speaker of whatever language it is that you're learning. And if you do that, you can really set yourself apart in terms of skill and ability when you're looking at the job market down the line. That was really all I had in terms of story and advice for whatever sage wisdom I can offer at the ripe old age of 23. But if you guys have any questions, like, now is the time, please let me know. And I really, again, I want you guys to have some input here and to kind of tell me what matters to you. And if there's anything that I can help with, or stories that I can tell or offer based on